Hi there, my name is James Lee. Welcome to my channel 5149, where I talk business, politics, and society. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the housing crisis. Why is it that nobody seems to be able to afford to buy a home these days? We're also going to talk a little bit about corporate diversity initiatives. After all, it is Pride Month and Juneteenth was just last week, and how these two seemingly different things, one a byproduct of over-financialization, and the other an attempt to change the physical appearance of corporate America, seemingly all converge at a single point, and that point is oppression. Let's first start with housing. I'm sure many of you have heard of single-family homes being snagged up by institutional investors like BlackRock, with roughly 1 in 5 homes sold to someone who never lives there. A lot of the reason why that's happening is because we have decided to financialize everything in our society, including housing, and that comes with some societal consequences. For some context, back in 1950, the average home cost roughly $7,400, less than 3 times the average annual income at the time, which was $2,900. Housing was seen much more as a commodity rather than as an investment vehicle. It's also important to mention that the government made a conscious decision to help make sure people could afford homes after coming back from World War II. For example, the 1944 authorization of the Veterans Administration Home Loan Program guaranteed millions of single-family and mobile home loans. Compare that to today. Average home prices are nearing $300,000 in the United States, almost 10 times the annual median income of just over $31,000. And the inevitable result of such financialization is oppression. Think about this for a second. Part of what it means to be free is the ability to own land. Recalling a little bit of AP history here, but the ability to own land is really what separates a serf in a feudal society from a worker in a capitalist society. And right now, our society is getting regressively more and more feudal. The dream of owning a home is becoming exponentially harder if the average millennial, who has now worked for roughly 10 years to save up for a starter home, has to compete with a large investment firm like BlackRock, who can put down an all-cash offer in excess of the listed price. But hey, I get it. Some people will say that's BlackRock's job. They're an investment firm. They exist for the sole purpose of making money. You know, what else do you expect? And that's true, but how do they have all this money? Well, right now the Federal Reserve has set interest rates to near zero, which basically means that these investment firms have access to unlimited sums of free money. Because for one reason or another, the Federal Reserve has deemed that to be the appropriate monetary policy that, quote unquote, ensures the system supports a healthy economy for U.S. households, communities, and businesses. Obviously, I'm being a little facetious here because it's quite clear that in reality, that's a load of BS.
What's an alarming statistic that your country doesn't care about?
35% of all US dollars was printed in the last 12 months. Market cap to GDP ratio is at all-time record highs. Look at where we are now compared to the previous bubbles. Record levels of corporate debt and household debt. The Shiller-Cape ratio is really high, which means almost every company in the S&P 500 is extremely overvalued, and all-time record low interest rates. In other words, the Fed is stuck between a rock and a hard place. Either they stop printing money, let interest rates normalize, and let the stock market crash, or they keep printing money, kick the can down the road, and hope for the best.
Yeah, so maybe it's not really about a quote-unquote healthy economy for households or communities. It's about the stock market or other things that rich people care about. Because who works at the Fed? Well, former investment bankers from big Wall Street firms like Goldman Sachs. In fact, the current Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, is a former investment banker. So no matter how they like to dress it up, those are just the things that they care about. And in terms of checks and balances, typically I would say it's kind of the government's job to intervene and protect its citizens from being exploited in this manner, but probably not going to happen given the record $2.9 billion in political contributions in the 2019-2020 election cycle, roughly half going to the Democrats and half to the Republicans. You see, influence is the name of the game, not ideology. And numerous Wall Street veterans have also joined the Biden administration. Not exactly an ideal situation, but one thing I will say is that villainizing Wall Street or Biden is a pretty easy thing to do. So there is another part of the housing story that I want to talk about that I think isn't discussed a lot, which is that the financialization of housing has made it so that there is a natural desire to maintain the high price of homes. And that's a sentiment that's shared by both local municipal governments and the people who own homes. For example, in California, there was a law passed in 1967 that requires cities and counties to produce prodigious reports to plan for housing and is the state's primary tool to encourage housing development and address a statewide shortage of homes that drives California's affordability problems. The problem is that local municipal governments aren't complying with the law Think about it, because we have now financialized housing, increasing the supply of houses in an area will naturally bring down the value of properties in that area, thereby hurting investments. The LA Times reported back in 2017, after more than a year of work and spending nearly $50,000, Foster City, which is a suburb of the San Francisco Bay Area, had an 87-page housing plan that proposed hundreds of new homes, mapped where they would go, and detailed the many ways the city could help make the construction happen. But a city councilman named Herb Perez admitted, "What I'm seeing here is an elaborate shell game, because we're kind of lying. It's the only word I can come up with. We have no intention of actually building the units." So, despite soaring demand for housing in the Bay Area, the city hasn't approved any new development projects in more than 5 years. And if we look at the new homes that are being built, they're being built for rent. There are entire built-for-rent communities popping up all over the country with billions of dollars of investment from firms like JP Morgan and Koch Industries. As you can see, when the richest and most powerful in our country, the banks, the Federal Reserve, the government, work in collusion with one another with the singular goal of accumulating as much wealth as possible, there can be no other outcome other than the oppression of the masses and a regression to feudalism. What kind of society do we have left if all we care about is money? But we got to convince people somehow, like putting out BS articles about how it's somehow better to rent than to own. That's one way to do it. And another way, which is the next thing I want to dive into, which is corporate diversity initiatives. I think a lot of people, a lot of good people, think that changing the composition of the boardroom or executive suites is a noble cause. And companies have really leaned into this with all kinds of programs and initiatives that tout their diversity efforts. But to them, diversity means normalizing the idea that our current system of exploiting people who are less fortunate in the name of profit maximization is okay, so long as there are a few black people, gay people, and women getting in on the action. And sure, maybe that is a sign of some progress, but I'm not sure if I buy into the premise that these woke companies are better, because all these programs and initiatives are pretty much designed to just make you look the other way. There's a saying I heard recently, something to the effect of diversity strengthens systems, even oppressive ones. And I think some people are starting to realize this. I really do think that people are taking notice that money lies at the heart of all of these corporate diversity initiatives. For example, if corporations really cared about gay rights, shouldn't that value be espoused and enforced across the entire organization? But it's not, it's just in places where they think it'll benefit their business. When a corporation like BlackRock talks about diversity and inclusion, what they're really talking about is changing the visual appearance of their employees and nothing more than that. Sure, I like that companies are open to having a black person or a gay person or a woman be in charge. That's great. But is BlackRock going to say, ooh, there's a nice black family who's worked really hard to save up and buy this home. Let's withdraw our offer in the name of bringing more diversity to the neighborhood? No way, they would never be allowed to do something like that because those values are incompatible with one another. Because if the fundamental goal is wealth accumulation above all else, there cannot be any other outcome other than exploitation and oppression. Economic inequality is inextricably tied together with social inequality, and real solutions that actually make our society more free and more diverse cannot be brought about without radically impacting the interests of the wealthy and the powerful. And they will not give up that power easily. They will give us gesture after gesture to normalize the oppressive system that we live in. They'll put up banners and billboards, they'll run advertisements and commercials. But ask yourself this when examining any corporate diversity or corporate responsibility initiative. Does it fundamentally change the way they do business? Is there a cost they're incurring? Because if there's not, if what they're proposing does not fundamentally impact the way they do business, nothing will ever change. And that's the point I wanted to make today. So thank you so much for watching. I think this is something that's particularly important to discuss because everything that happens in our society is a choice that's being made, and it's usually the powerful who make it. And if the quote-unquote change they're selling us doesn't actually impact the interests of the powerful, then there really is no change at all. I'd love to hear what you think, so I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and also share it with your friends and family. And also please consider supporting my work by subscribing and hitting the notification bell icon so you don't miss any of my future videos. As always, thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you next week.